been our rabbi and now Rabbi Emerita. And I first met Rabbi Dreyfus when I was temple shopping, because we had moved from the north side, and temple shopping that I was looking for a place to pray. And I stopped in at B'nai Yehuda Beth Sholem and sat at the back, because that's where I was used to sitting at a big temple that I used to belong to. And there's rules about sitting at the back. You expect to just fade in and just be an observer and a fly on the wall and so forth. And, the Shabbat service and Saturday morning proceeded, and she called on me. And I thought this violates some kind of international law or something. And she called on me, but as my face was registering, I was thinking, or confusion or something like that. And she said, from the bima, you look confused. And, can I help you with something? And that's the way she is. She's a teacher, and she wants to know what's going on in your mind, and she wants to hear what you're thinking. And because she's a great teacher, she's also a wonderful student, and she travels in the circle of some of the greatest Jewish minds, I think, that are out there today. And because she's a great teacher and a great student, she's also so involved with life, because she's a part of a religion like yours that says that we don't study just to learn, we also study to practice and to do and to move into action. And she's involved in so many tremendous things. So that wasn't the last time she's called on me because I look confused. It's happened like 10 or 12 times, and it actually, it happened twice in a row. And I made up my mind I was going to Botox my face. I was just going to freeze my face, and no matter what I heard, no matter what I was thinking about, I'm not going to register anything. But she got me again. So it's not our little secret that she's a wonderful teacher. She's actually been called one of the most influential rabbis in the nation, and that's partly because she knows everybody. It seems like there is no rabbi that she hasn't either taught or studied with. She is the past president and was the first woman to be president of the Chicago Board of Rabbis, and she was the second woman to be president of the Central Conference on American Rabbis, which is the center for rabbis in North America. It has like 2,000 members, and she was president of that. She's obviously been a great, path breaker for women in the rabbinate as well. I think she was the first woman in Illinois to be a rabbi, and probably the first who was, as I understand it, you were with child at the time of your ordination. And she's just been a tremendous teacher and inspiration to all of us. I would never told her that before, but what can I say? I just am very happy to invite you to meet a rabbi, Ellen Weinberg Dreyfus.
Well, thank you. Thank you, thank you. I am so honored to be here today, and I give thanks to God as well as to the organizers of this event. You can tell that I'm fighting a cold, so I hope that I have voice to get through this, and you'll understand if I sound a little scratchy. But I give thanks to all of those who organized this, to your Imam and the other leaders of this community, to Chuck Stone and to Ernie Radowitz and Brian Zachem from the Jewish community. You all have learned and you are modeling the importance of interfaith dialogue. It is something that many of us have been involved in and engaged in for a long time. But for others, it's new and different. We hope that we can help everyone see that this is something natural and can even become second nature for all of us. Thank you. This talk was titled Muslim-Jewish Relationship Building. And as minorities in a mostly Christian population here in America, it is crucial that Muslims and Jews form coalitions and learn about what we share in common. While there have been some historical and political facts that have come to divide our communities in certain times and places, we have religious and cultural similarities and kinship that should bring us together. Unlike our Christian neighbors who pray in whatever language they speak, we have sacred languages of scripture and prayer. Muslims around the world pray in Arabic, and Jews around the world pray in Hebrew. This can make us seem strange and foreign to our local neighbors, who might think that we are saying something sinister or dangerous in those words that they don't understand. So both Muslims and Jews are involved in constant efforts of public relations to explain ourselves and our beliefs to the general, and that is Christian public. We all know that this can be tedious, but in the long run, it's worthwhile. I would broaden our topic today to the entire idea of interreligious dialogue, a subject dear to my heart. We live in a multicultural, multi-religious society. The walls of the ghetto were torn down centuries ago, and the vast majority of Jews and Muslims in America interact with people of other faith traditions on a regular basis. Some of this interaction is casual or business related, and some is through close friendships and family relationships. So we all do interfaith dialogue, even when we're not conscious of it. When you wish your neighbor a Merry Christmas or Happy Hanukkah or Ramadan Mubarak, you are engaging in one level of interfaith dialogue, the basic level that acknowledges the religion of your neighbor with respect and goodwill. When you have that sometimes awkward conversation about why back-to-school night shouldn't be on Rosh Hashanah, or why a pizza party might not be the best thing for the Girl Scouts during Passover, or why you would rather that the neighborhood block party would not be focused on beer and bacon if it's going to include Muslim neighbors, you are entering in a different level of dialogue. And when you sit down and have a heart-to-heart with your friend or neighbor or coworker about your beliefs and religious practices, you are participating in serious interfaith dialogue, whether or not the conversation has that label. I have been privileged to participate in interfaith dialogue on many levels, in my South suburban community, in the greater Chicago area, on a national level, and at international conferences. It has truly been a high point of my rabbinate, something that has brought great meaning and satisfaction and has enabled me to meet and interact with wonderful people. Before I share some of my experiences, I want to begin with a basic tutorial, if you will, about the process. Grab a lozenge. Maybe that'll help. Who knows? Ultimately, we have no control, right? That's one religious principle we can all agree on. So here's some principles for interreligious dialogue, adapted from Leonard Swidler's The Dialogue Decalogue from the Journal of Ecumenical Studies. 1, enter into dialogue so that you can learn and grow, not to change the other. 2, Be conscious of the need to allow people the space to enter the discussion. Some people are more sheepish about offering their thoughts, but will be encouraged to do so if more outspoken persons avoid dominating the exchange. 3. Everyone must be honest and sincere, even if that means revealing discomforts with your own tradition or that of the other. Everyone must assume that everyone else is being equally honest and sincere. 4. Everyone must be permitted to define their own religious experience and identity, and this must be respected by others. 5. Proselytizing or seeking to convert the conversation partner is not permitted in an interreligious dialogue setting. Participants should feel free to express their own faith, traditions, and beliefs, but not try to persuade others to assent to them. 6. Don't feel that you are the spokesperson for your entire faith tradition, or that you ought somehow know everything there is to know about it. Admit any confusion or uncertainty you might have if a puzzling question arises. 7. Don't assume in advance where points of agreement or disagreement will exist. 8. Everyone should be willing to be self-critical. 9. All should strive to experience the other's faith from within and be prepared to view themselves differently as a result of an outside perspective. And 10, trust is a must. I think those are good principles and something that might be helpful in much of our lives. One of the wonderful parts of being a congregational rabbi throughout my career has been being part of a clergy group or ministerial association or whatever it is called in a particular locale. In that group, we do not agree on theology. We read different scriptures. We celebrate different holy days, but we have much in common. We all try to serve God and serve our congregations. We all care about the moral and ethical climate of the community in which we live. And we all deal with interesting people in challenging situations. I have been blessed to be a part of several of these groups and to develop friendships with ministers and priests and pastors of various denominations. Among the great advantages of these relationships is that if a problem arises, we can pick up the phone or meet for coffee and discuss the situation with a friend and not a stranger. This was brought home just last week, following the murders in the synagogue in Pittsburgh and at the supermarket in Kentucky, when my colleague, Rabbi Harari, and I decided we wanted to have some sort of interfaith gathering to bring our community together. I called my dear friend, Reverend Bob Klanowski, a Lutheran pastor with whom I have developed a good relationship through our work together, and he met us at Starbucks, that great temple of interfaith, where we sat and crafted a meaningful service of lament and healing, attended by hundreds last Tuesday evening. We were honored that your Imam was in attendance and participated, along with representatives of other Muslim communities and many Christian denominations. Sometimes interfaith dialogue can give us the grounding to avert crises because of the relationships we forge. This story goes back several years, but it clearly illustrates my point. When I was president of the Chicago Board of Rabbis, I had the honor of sitting on the Council of Religious Leaders of Metropolitan Chicago, with the heads of the various Protestant denominations, the cardinal, and leaders of other religious communities, many religious communities. You may remember that after the attacks of September 11, 2001, there was a good deal of debate about what should happen next. Some wanted to go to war, and many were opposed. Some members of the council wanted us to send a letter to President Bush, urging him to pursue diplomatic rather than military measures. The council met to consider whether to send a letter and what it should say. In one draft version, there was a sentence that made reference to Israel and the Palestinians, and not in a manner that favored Israel. I'm not sure why the sentence was even there, since it had nothing to do with the topic. But unfortunately, there are those who take every opportunity to bash Israel. I knew, however, that if I were to object, it would look to some like the Jews were preventing this peaceful overture. But I happened to be sitting next to Cardinal George, of blessed memory, at the meeting. I quietly told him that I found that sentence inappropriate and unnecessary, and furthermore, that if that sentence stayed in the letter, the Board of Rabbis would not be able to sign on. The cardinal waited his turn, and then suggested that the sentence about Israel-Palestine was out of place and should be deleted. Done without controversy or bad feelings. Our synagogue, Shir Tikva, which you heard means the Song of Hope, in Homewood, has been part of the Interfaith Coalition, SWIFT, the Southwest Interfaith Team, and I know many of you have been involved with SWIFT as well, made up of Jews, Christians, and Muslims in the south and southwest suburbs. It is completely organized and run by volunteers. Several years ago, SWIFT was highlighted as an example of this kind of grassroots program for the visit of Dr. Ibrahim Al-Naimi, the director of the Doha International Center for Interfaith Dialogue. Dr. Al-Naimi visited New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles to learn about what we Americans do in the interfaith field. We hosted a dinner and discussion at the synagogue for his group and several SWIFT participants. That meeting was probably what led to my invitation to participate in the interfaith conferences in Doha, Qatar, in 2011, 2013, 2014, and 2016. That conference, sponsored by the Doha International Center for Interfaith Dialogue, is a fascinating experience. The majority of the participants are Muslims from all over the world. The next largest group is Christians of all denominations, and then there are some Jews, fewer than 25 in a conference of several hundred. The center is funded by the Foreign Ministry of Qatar, and their funds are seemingly unlimited. Their idea of interfaith dialogue is to have panels with speakers of various faiths to speak to an audience, all talking heads, if you will. Someone must have suggested that they try having smaller groups, so in the following year, in addition to the main plenary speakers, they organized 4 or 5 simultaneous panels to speak to smaller audiences. The Arab world has norms of formality, and they didn't seem to be able to get beyond that structure. The real dialogue, in my experience, went on in the corridors and at meals, where we had the opportunity to talk informally and get to know each other. I met some wonderful people from around the world, and some of our conversations continue across the planet on Facebook, and I was able to see a friend I met in Doha when we visited London last year. The best text from Scripture that I can find for guidance on the subject of how we as leaders and participants and followers of various religious traditions can uphold faith and serve humanity is from the Hebrew Bible. In the book of Micah, chapter 6, verse 8, the prophet states, Hiyid lacha adam ma tov u'ma Adonai doresh mimcha, ki im asot mishpat ve'avat chesed ve'hatznei alechet im Elohecha. You have been told, O mortal, what is good and what the Eternal requires of you, only to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk modestly with your God. I could give many sermons on just that verse, but I will leave it for you to contemplate so that we have time for questions and discussions. Again, my thanks to all of you for inviting me here today.
Thank you.
Do we have time to do some question and discussion?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Mention your theology. What is your theology?
Well, Jews believe in one God, who is both the God of Israel, the God of the Jewish people, and the creator of the universe. It's very similar to the Muslim belief in Allah. So it's one God, just one, no intermediaries, just one God. Yes?
How long, how long have women been in the position of rabbi? Has that always been, or has that?
No, it's pretty new. Although there was one woman who was ordained in Germany before World War II, and then she was murdered in Auschwitz by the Nazis. We didn't really know about her until the Berlin Wall came down. But the first woman was ordained in the United States in 1972. So it's really very recent. I was ordained in 1979, so I'm one of the first 20 or so. I was number 11 out of my seminary, out of the Reform movement. So it's pretty new, and still to this day, I get people who say, I didn't know women could be rabbis. Because their image of what a rabbi is the guy from Central Casting, with the beard and the black hat, but we don't all look like that. And there are hundreds and hundreds of female rabbis since 1972, and there are different movements within Judaism, and now in the Reform movement and Reconstructing Judaism and the Conservative movement, it's probably half and half within the classes of men and women. And now even within Orthodox Judaism, there is a growing possibility within modern Orthodoxy of women to function in a role very much like the rabbi. There are certain restrictions of what she can and cannot do, but they are ordaining women to be spiritual leaders.
So the 70s, the women's league movement really did birth a lot of change.
Absolutely,
in the world.
absolutely, yeah.
That's interesting.
There were a lot of liberation movements going on in the 70s. Yeah.
Well, that kind of touched on the question.
Sure.
How did the civil rights movement affect the Jewish community during that time and even now?
Well, I think there was a lot of symbiosis going on. There was a lot of involvement because, as you know, there were Jews who were involved in the civil rights movement, and there was a lot of cooperation. And there is that classic picture of Dr. King marching, and next to him was Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was one of the great American Jewish leaders of that time. And there were rabbis who spoke at the March on Washington, and there were Jews who were involved in the civil rights movement at the grassroots level as well as in the national level. And of course, we know about those people who were martyred, Goodman and Schwerner and Cheney. Well, Goodman and Schwerner were Jewish boys who were down there helping with the bus. Were murdered with those in the Freedom Riders. I remember growing up, I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and our Passover Seder, you know that Passover is our festival of liberation, our festival of freedom. And when I was a kid, we would read the story of the freedom, liberation from Egyptian slavery, but I was growing up in the 60s, well, I was born in the 50s and then growing up in the 60s, and I remember we would add to our discussion of the liberation from Egypt the stories of what was going on in the civil rights movement right then. It was because in our story of going out from Egypt, there's a line in the book we read, the Haggadah, the telling of the story on Passover, that says, in every generation, each of us must feel as though we personally went out from Egypt. So we couldn't tell that story without telling the story of what our neighbors were going through right then. So that's how I grew up. That's what my parents taught me from a very young age. So, you know, and my parents had friends of all races, and that was just how we grew up. So, yeah. Other questions? Don't be shy. This is your Ask the Rabbi moment.
Could you explain what you just said about the Passover, your mother, your grandmother, recite that passage?
So, the festival of Passover, if you read in the Hebrew Bible, it's the going out from Egypt. When the Israelites were slaves in Egypt, they were able to leave Egypt, and there's a whole, and in the Bible it says, you shall tell your child on that day, this is what God did for me when I went out from Egypt. And so the rabbis took that very seriously, and there is a whole telling, and there is a whole ritual of telling. And so when we celebrate the festival, there's a tradition of every family, or sometimes in larger groups, sitting down and having what we call a seder. A seder means order. There's an order of the service of the meal. So before you get to eat, there's a whole lot of praying going on and telling. But it's actually educationally brilliant, because part of the telling involves using certain foods that remind us of parts of the story. So, for example, we have bitter herbs, like we take horseradish or something like that, and we taste that to remind us of the bitterness of slavery. Well, what a brilliant idea. You not only, hear about it, but you use all your senses. Or there's a concoction we make called charoset, which is kind of a mixture of apples and nuts and some cinnamon and people use wine or grape juice or mix it all up. And they say that's to remind us of the mortar that they used to hold the bricks together when they were making the cities for Pharaoh in Egypt. So you eat that, and you put that on matzah. And what's matzah? That's the flat bread. They look like saltine crackers on steroids, There's a great big flat crackers, right? So the matzah is both the bread of freedom and the bread of slavery. We say that matzah was the poor bread that our ancestors ate in Egypt, but it's also, we tell the story that when they were leaving Egypt, they didn't have time for the bread to rise because they were in such a hurry, and so they ate unleavened bread. So we eat this unleavened bread, and during the whole week of Passover, we don't eat anything leavened. So it's a whole big culinary challenge. But in my house, it's a culinary feast. We eat so well because we don't eat any ordinary bread or cake or anything like that. Everything is done from scratch. And boy, is it good, because we have recipes that come from my great-grandmothers, and they're just so special, and it's just wonderful. My kids, when my youngest son went off to college, and he said he was coming home, and he said, I can't wait to come home for your food. I love your food. It was just, it warmed my heart. There's nothing better than the satisfaction of feeding your family.
So you mostly eat fruits, vegetables, no bread.
Well, during the week of Passover, we can eat meat also.
Yeah, meat.
Yeah, and fruits and vegetables. You can eat things that are made with matzah.
Matzah.
Have you ever seen it in the stores? So look in some of the supermarkets. They might have it in certain, like in the kosher section, if there's a kosher.
Well, you said leaven, which is flatbread.
No, leavening means it rises. So you can't use anything with yeast or let it rise. So it has to be baked before it rises.
No bread.
No ordinary bread, right? Just matzah. Yeah, yeah. So and then we have this whole ritual of the Passover Seder, which we share, and it's quite a. And then there are things like questions. There are 4 questions. Why is this night different from all other nights? And the children are encouraged to ask questions. So the whole thing is, you shall tell your child on that day, and we want the next generation to understand. And so the whole thing is to encourage the kids and the next generation to learn and to ask questions. And so it's all designed that way. Beautiful ceremony. My favorite holiday, I must confess.
It kind of reminds me when the Africans, and then they became Americans,